Welcome back to Pulse. Today we're joined by Diego Chicharro, former head of effectiveness at Publicis and now founder of Unfair Edge, a consultancy built to help brands measure what matters and grow with clarity. Diego is one of the sharpest thinkers in the industry when it comes to creativity, brand and commercial performance. He cuts through vanity metrics, challenges short-term thinking and shows brands how you can use cultural intelligence and strategy insight to create real, measurable impact. In this episode, we will get into why culture is a growth engine, why creativity is still the highest ROI lever in marketing, and how businesses can build systems that connect the dots between insights, brand and effectiveness. Thank you, Diego, for joining us.
An intro.
Welcome, Diego.
Thank you. You almost pronounced my name right.
Okay, tell us.
It was the Italian version, you know, but didn't.
Chicharro? Is it?
Chicharro, but just call me Diego and I'll be all right.
Diego.
But thank you for the intro.
Cool. Let's set the scene. So
Yes.
effectiveness. What's going on? There's lots of chat. It feels like we're at kind of a bit of a meeting head in terms of brand, in terms of performance. Give us a little bit of an overview of your views on what is going well, what's maybe not going well at the moment, and what brands are doing that they need to be doing better.
I mean, we are, as you know, as everyone will be feeling, we're kind of in the on the edge of a looming kind of recession, and everyone is feeling it, right? Cost of living crisis.
We're here already, aren't we?
Yes, we're here. We're alive, but we're feeling the weight of the economy, and so do clients. So when that happens, it's not an odd situation. Everyone defaults to the short term. Everyone is shrinking budgets. The first thing to cut in a business is marketing because it's still a discretionary spend, which means it's not really needed to grow. Now, there's a pile of evidence I won't bore you with. We can send a link to people interested, but the way brands grow is through thinking about a balance between the short term and the long term. It's very simple. The problem is when there's fear in the market, you only think about the short term. And when that happens, the thing that most of the clients I work with don't understand is that when you're focusing on the short term, you're focusing on basically making your ads work today by getting people to buy today. And that proportion of people is tiny. And this surprises everyone when they see the actual numbers because it's been measured. Again, there's a pile of evidence about it. And it's around 5%. So at any given point in the market, you've got 5% of people who might be interested in buying now your category. Of those, there's a new research from Oxford University and Wavemaker that has come out very recently, like a month ago. Of those 5%, 84% of them have already decided what brand they're going to buy, even before they enter the market and they actually go to the supermarket and pick up, a bottle of shampoo. Which means you've got less than 1% really when you're focusing on short-term performance advertising, which more often than not is digital and social. Those very rational ads that are saying, this is my product, this is my benefit, buy now. You're targeting less than 1%. So as you can imagine, that's not a very sustainable way to grow. When you think about the sizes of the audiences, right?
It feels very obvious when you say that, and it feels very logical when you just think about how you influence people, right? Like to influence them before they've got to that kind of point of sale. And even from a brand perspective, the understanding that brand has the power to build salience with a market to be able to drive that market growth.
That's it.
So the evidence is there. It feels quite obvious. Why do you feel everyone gets caught in the trap of thinking it's kind of obvious of results and what you need to, say to stakeholders and things like that. But why do you think people really get caught in that trap of short term? And what do you think is that unlock to start thinking more long term?
I mean, it's partly our fault as an industry. We've been telling clients to be brave and believe in cool, slightly fluffy, creative ideas for a long time without showing the evidence of why that works. So that's been partly our fault. And it's partly the fault of the marketing department. I mean, I work client side. When you don't talk the language of the CFO and you can't justify your spend, why would they invest in you? And it just happens that justifying long-term spend is trickier than justifying short-term spend. So when we're in a climate like today, when there's a looming recession, people fear for their jobs, they default to short-term tactics. But when they're hitting or missing the mark, is that would not only be detrimental in the long term for your brand, but also in the midterm, in 6 months, 12 months time, you will start seeing your ROI declining, your costs ramping up, because you're just hitting over and over again that 5%. And what that means is that 5% is becoming exhausted of you hitting them, Meta and Google will charge you more to hit those people. So there is a point, saturation point, which it's called performance plateau, where you can't grow anymore and everything starts declining. And that's not a long-term problem, it's a short-term problem as well. And that's why I spend most of my time trying to show brands that investing in the long term is also investing in the short term. It works in both.
Yeah, the problem with that in the e-com industry, right? Where a lot of it's over-reliance on performance and paid.
Exactly right.
Where they hit that performance plateau, and then unless they're investing huge amounts of budget into paid advertising every month, they just seem to fall off a cliff. And I guess that's where the approach of taking an integrated approach, right, where you have your short-term, because there is still a role for these big, cool, short-term, fluffy moments, but I think it's the education to brands where even asking the question around what are you even trying to get to in 2-3 years time, and what does that plan even look like? Because something that we see a lot is that, you know, you have a 12-month strategy and then there might be a shift in maybe a CMO or a marketing director, and then everything gets reset again. How do we mitigate against that?
Well, the thing is that you don't lose anything by having a short and long-term plan, right? If you're focused on short-term, and that's what you're doing at the moment, to introduce long-term thinking, but also still look at those short-term tactics, like you can balance the two together, right? And you can do things, and there's lots of brands that are starting to do this, where even from a social media perspective, there's been a lot on the flattening of the funnel and the way that people are buying products, and you can actually have things that are growing your brand and growing your brand perception and being consistent with your messaging and all the things that we'll probably go on to talk about in a second, but also have conversion tactics within that as well. So I feel that is that the evolution of the way that brands
they call it boathism, which is a very crappy word for it, but yes, basically we need to do both, obviously depending on your brand, right? If you're a startup, every brand starts growing just purely by performance because they're small, they're not known, and they've got a budget that can't really reach many people, so you reach that 5%. Once you've saturated those people and you've reached this performance plateau, you'll see it. You'll see all your dashboards starting to stall. You'll see your growth. It's called the doom loop, right? You get into this kind of vicious circle of performance, and then you need to start scaling up and doing the long term. So yes, doing both is what is more effective. And the reason to convince clients to do both is by telling them, one, not to be brave, but to be safe. Because the safe thing to do is to invest in your brand long term and not just focus on a tiny proportion of the people who might or might not buy you today. And two, it's about showing them that investing in brand is not a fluffy thing that is just going to have an effect in 3 years' time. It has an effect right now. The moment you launch a brand campaign, and I've seen these in many businesses, you'll see, if you've only done performance advertising so far, you'll see a complete shift in your metrics. You might take a small hit. Some of your channels might take a small ROI, very short-term hit, but the momentum you gain by doing broader scale advertising, doesn't need to be TV, it can be broad scale social or PR. Then you will see how that gains momentum and primes more people for then your performance marketing in month 3, 6 months will perform much better, because you're not just hitting people cold saying, buy my thing. They would have a vague memory of your brand, which is all we need is a vague memory of the brand for performance marketing to work a bit harder.
And I guess in line with that, because there is the intention of thinking more long term, but then there's also the output of what you're doing to cut through with your audience. So like you say, not to be bold, but I think that's exactly what brands need to do. Like you look at like a Red Bull, for example, like they in a way break all the rules in a sense of like how a brand should act. Like their approach is, let's break, I think the video a few weeks ago where it was a guy breaking the world record for skiing down Everest. I mean, it's just incredible that the video.
He goes quite small. I was expecting him to go faster.
Yes,
I loved it.
Little bit by little bit. Yeah, like, come on,
a bit of feedback.
Let's speed this up a bit.
You don't want to just jump straight.
Yeah, but I look at a brand like that and I'm like, God, like it's so obvious when you see them, right? Like they are the market leader.
Yes.
The product is exactly the same as the competitor. The ingredients are pretty much exactly the same. There's no difference really in the product. That is a business that is purely brand led, and it's showing that they, by being bold, by doing things that are entertaining, are leading their category. It's driving directly through to business results.
Absolutely.
So why are brands not doing more of that, do you think?
Do you think? I think it's because like Red Bull as a brand is so clear on like who they are, right? And they've had that DNA and that foundation of what they stand for, and I think very clear around who their audience is. I think what we're seeing anyway is that like a lot of brands don't know who their audience is or where they are. So that very like foundational insight into community, culture, consumer isn't there. And when that isn't there, I feel like that's where all blockers come in around innovation or boldness, because you're scared. You know, is this the right thing to do? And I think that's the piece that, you know, as strategists now, especially in times of turbulence in terms of the economy, we need to educate and get to the core of that. And I feel like if we do that properly, it will lead to better work long term.
It's about making choices, right? Like strategy is not about saying yes to everything. So you need to be very clear what you stand for, what's your product for, what kind of moments you want a brand to be relevant, what kind of people would appeal your brand to. And loads of brands just want to do everything at once. And that is a key to disaster and diluting your budgets to death, especially when you're not a huge brand like Red Bull. Red Bull now has achieved mass appeal. They just appeal to a mindset that everyone can have, which is daring and it's not niche anymore. A truck driver drinks Red Bull and doesn't jump off a cliff with a wingsuit. Right? They just appeal to a feeling. But yes, they grew through those pockets of culture of extreme sports. And that was very clever to them, because everyone else, and I know this really well because I know the guys who founded Red Bull, and they now got a brand called Carabao, which I helped launch in the UK, and that brand was focusing on very functional attributes. And that's the reason why they didn't make it through. And now, you know, Monster Energy, Red Bull,
sport, right? Carabao with Carabao Cup and stuff like that.
Yes, but I think they failed to become relevant, to your point, in culture amongst a broader audience, just like Red Bull did. So what Red Bull did, I don't think it was risky or brave necessarily. That was the safest strategy they could do to grow, which is becoming relevant in a way that is organic, and you don't need to pay for every single conversion, which happens when you just focus on performance. So if you just focus on short-term performance, you need to pay small brands, Meta, Google, for every single conversion. When you focus on having an impact in culture and creating an impression amongst the 95% with brand building, over time you create that stock, that mental availability over time that you can basically convert. And it's much more effective than the other. So that's why I don't like when in every agency that I worked in, when people talk about bravery to clients, because that's the wrong conversation. The right conversation should be, this is how you can be safe with your business, and this is how you can talk to your CFO to unlock the bigger budget, which is the number one bottleneck for every brand, is they're not investing enough in advertising, especially now.
Well, I think that's why the cost of being dull report that I think System 1 did was so good, because you're right, everything when it comes to doing something brand-led or long-term thinking is always seen as a risk in a sense, but it's not a risk. It's actually, you can't afford not to stand out, right? Is the argument. And that was a beautiful piece that positioned it in a way of like, this is what you're missing out on from a business growth perspective by being boring, which is what most brands are doing at the moment. Let's face it, like most advertising is generic. We know there's a problem with that. We know that there's drop-offs in social media because young people are being overloaded with these ads on a daily basis. Like there is a shift that needs to happen in the industry to be more creative, entertaining, brand build led. We need more of that, basically, don't we? We need more of that conversation which flips it on its head and shows it as like, this is something you can't afford not to do, basically.
Exactly right. I mean, the problem is the words we use seem very risky to clients. So saying become part of culture, be brave, jump on trends, many people make that mistake. That all those things are not business or marketing terms. What we should focus on is telling them, look, you're missing out on 99% of your audience by not doing this. Therefore, your business, not long term, in the next 3 months, you'll start seeing an impact if you just do this kind of advertising that is rational, dull, as Peter Field and John Evans talk about in that report. And that is the way we should talk about this. It's not about a bunch of people, which we love doing cool stuff and creative stuff, which I love. But without that substance, you can't expect the client to, defend your ideas in a boardroom. And your ideas will be killed so quickly, especially in big organizations that are even more cost averse, risk averse, sorry. So you won't go through the layers of bureaucracy because you don't have the arguments And that's why the cost of doll is even higher for bigger brands.
Yeah.
And bigger brands tend to be even safer. Like take P&G. Most of its advertising, apart from Old Spice, is very safe. And the reason is because in order to get through all that bureaucracy for a good idea to win and to be culturally relevant, you need very strong arguments. And until now, which we've got all the evidence in the world to prove it, we didn't have it. And that's the gap that I saw in the market when I started my consultancy, that there's a disconnect there.
Yeah.
We've got all the information in the world, all the effectiveness data in the world to say this is the right thing to do, yet people are not doing it, and agencies are not necessarily helping clients to make the right decisions.
Yeah,
100%. Moving into like the cultural intelligence bit, because that's what we do. So we kind of help brands get insight into culture, into audiences, into trends, and what's really going on, to give them the confidence to do that, the confidence to stand out. Do you think that's something that brands are missing a lot of, is that insight? You can now chat GPT things quite quickly, but it's not giving you the richness of something you can take to your team to say, this is why we need to do this, and we need to be bolder because this is what's going to generate awareness with our audience.
I feel like it could be a quite a good antidote to getting things pushed through, right? The deep insight side of things. From a big agency perspective, Diego, like what level of insight do you think really were you getting that had a real impact?
So there's two jobs for a strategist. One is to get to that level of insight that is going to make the work culturally relevant, or in other terms, famous, or again, in other terms, talked about. That's called just good brand building, right?
Yeah.
We can call it culture, we can call it fame.
Yeah.
So again, a ton of evidence that shows that that's what works and that's what makes brands grow. There's that role for a strategist to unlock those insights, which you guys do amazingly well with understanding the culture people operate in, and then finding that insight that ChatGPT won't give you, because ChatGPT is just giving you the most predictable answer, and it's giving it to you and your competitor as well, by the way. So yes, you need someone human to find that. And then there is the other job of the strategist, which is unlocking that opportunity to start with, because you need a client, an organization, to believe that this is the right thing to do for us to get a commission on a piece, to find that insight, to make that work.
Yeah.
So I think those two things are currently missing or partially done by both big and small agencies, and that is why this is a vicious circle.
Yeah.
And we just need to break the doom loop, as some people call it.
And what we do is kind of qual and quant. So I think that's obviously a lot of people will be doing more bigger reports and kind of bigger data on, Gen Z are doing this or whatever it might be. But I feel like that's what's also really missing, I feel, is like the qualitative, actually going out and speaking to
Definitely
somebody in music, somebody in fashion, like what's happening, and getting that real deeper insight. I feel that is massively missing. And big brands in particular are probably buying big reports from big companies, but it's not going to have that richness, and it's not going to have the ability to be that reactive around what's going on in culture.
To be honest with you, most of the time, because of how retainers have been shrinking, research is not being done well in either way. Qualitative and quantitative. Yes, it's easier to just get a stat from a report. You just can't just Google it. You don't even need to buy these days, or ask ChatGPT. It can give you a pretty comprehensive summary of stats out there, but it won't give you the actual qualitative insight. And sometimes insights are something like Rory Sutherland has the best definition of an insight that I know. You know what he says? He says that an insight is just obvious after you've seen it.
Yeah.
So the best insights in the world, like you're not you or you're hungry, they're very obvious, but only after you've seen it.
Yeah. So
when those people were trying to crack that problem, it took them a fucking long time to get to that. Or for example, I worked for Piano Ferries, huge ferry operator. We completely repositioned them by saying, we might not be the fastest or the cheapest, because you can go to France with an EasyJet, much better and cheaper, right? Or take your car the tunnel and you're there in 2 hours. You don't need to do an overnight trip. But we told them, you make the journey more enjoyable. It's much more enjoyable than getting your butt kicked in by a baby in a tourist class, or being trapped in a metal tube going through the channel. And that is something obvious only after you've seen it. And we only got to that by talking to real people who actually experienced the summer of chaos, for example, in that case, where
Yeah.
travel disruption. You remember post-COVID, there were piles of luggage in Heathrow.
Yeah, it's carnage.
People were like very angry. A lot of people got trapped in the tunnel as well because the train broke and they were like wandering around like a zombie apocalypse situation. And we realized that just by talking to people, and they hated trains and planes. So we're like, well, let's ride that wave of culture, right? That people are not liking this and saying, look, there is another way. You can take a ferry. And the campaign was called There Is Another Way.
Yeah, that's a crucial
So
thing
it's this
as well,
kind
yeah.
of cultural thing that I think
Absolutely.
it's key, and you won't get in a report or a ChatGPT.
Yeah. I think there's a bit of an evolution happening though as well from a brand side in terms of insight, where maybe you go through a phase of collecting some insights, and then that would then impact and kind of help shape a campaign. Something that we've been talking about and looking at and doing at the moment is almost having an always-on insight system for brands, because I think things are moving so quickly.
Yeah.
Culture is moving at 100 miles an hour. In order to really be at the forefront of what your customer and cultural scenes that you're kind of trying to break into are doing, you need to be in it, always on, 24 hours a day. And I think that's what's missing at the moment, is that yes, you can get those big strategic insights that help shape a campaign, but to really get that feedback loop,
The real time
feedback loop,
finger
you
on the
need
pulse,
to be working on who those people are and speaking to them regularly.
And you almost need a few different pillars of insight as well, because you need, as you were saying with the ferries, you need that what's your place in the world for people, and that requires insight,
like a foundational
what do people
idea.
think, what do people think of us, how do we fit into people's lives, and that requires real insight into how people perceive you within culture. You then need trends, because you need to understand what's going on, how are people reacting,
how do you make that bigger idea relevant today?
How are people buying, how are people digesting information, what's going off, and then it is that kind of emergence of that, isn't it? It's like, what's our place in the world as a brand, and what are people reacting to?
That's exactly right.
And then how do we matched in, the overarching thing is the longer term strategy, who are we and what are our values, and how do we want to turn up in the world? So it's those three combined is
we talked about it, right? Like the long and the short of it of culture. I think we can create a whole research around it, because I think it's very similar to the way businesses operate and grow in, right? Like the long and the short of advertising, it's very similar to the long and the short of culture that advertising operates in. There are longer term trends, like things that would never change no matter what, and probably you want to bet on those to build your brand around. Like Christmas happens once a year, and there is a Coke truck coming around. It's a very simple thing, but they bet on happiness, and who's gonna go against that simple thought that is gonna go forever. And then you've got how you make your brand relevant today in this market, in this environment. How do you get the pulse on how the nation's feeling? For example, McDonald's is a great example of doing that, because they've got the long-term positioning of who they are and what they do and all those things, but then they are really good at, for example, when they came out of COVID, to understanding how the nation felt and how maybe McDonald's helps them reconnect in a certain way that didn't work before. And that's what you need when you are a big brand, especially, but for bigger brands it works as well, and you need to get your finger on the pulse of everything that's happening, so you don't miss out on the opportunity. And actually, as we know from, the cost of dollar is a great piece of research, right? That shows you that when you are culturally relevant, they don't say culturally relevant, but if you look into the way they've analyzed those campaigns, they call fame campaigns. Campaigns that get people talked about. What does that mean, culturally relevant, right? They saw that those campaigns are 6 times more efficient at generating profit with the same media budget. And what I found fascinating when you asked me about culture, because then I connected the dots with, I was talking with Don Boyd, head of marketing at Kantar, and was talking about the Vibe Index, which is a synthetic index. It's not a synthetic index, it's an index based on panel data, people's answers about brands, right? And it's trying to understand what is the cultural relevance of brands. And they found exactly the same figures. So if you look at the top brands that are culturally relevant versus the bottom of the list, the least culturally relevant, there's a 6x difference in terms of how big those brands are and how much they can grow, which is exactly the same than the cost of dough. I was thinking about writing about it because I found it fascinating that they found with very different methodologies exactly the same. So that's the kind of difference from being culturally relevant from not being culturally relevant. And I think part of it is the short pulse, and the other part is the longer term positioning that you're building on with those short-term bursts of activity that you can cement your brand in people's brains as Red Bull, daring, or Coke, happy Christmas, or McDonald's reunion.
I just like the fact that they had a cow chewing grass in a field.
I love that.
They said, was it like 60% of that? It was something crazy. It was like a crazy stat.
The average.
They show people. It was on the system when they show people a cow eating grass in a field, and then whatever 60-70% of ads, and the cow beat most of the ads. Which I think that tells you the state of what's going on at the moment. I think brands are just probably get so caught up in themselves and what they feel they need to talk about from a product point of view, from a their values point of view. Without that, and there's just such a disconnect between the audience and what do they want?
Would they care?
And on that, I guess to finish, looking into the future. So, what does a modern brand represent, and what does a modern brand need to do from an effectiveness point of view? We've touched on a few of these kind of points, but what are you seeing the brands that are breaking the rules doing from an effectiveness and brand building perspective?
To be honest with you, what I always tell clients is no matter what changes in the market, the good old principles that have been proven over and over again, that's what you need to stick to. Now, those principles like reaching a broad audience, growing through penetration, mental availability, distinctive brand assets, all those things, you might need to adjust to different realities in different cultural contexts, in different media environments like we're in today. So today, there is more content for people to consume that's never existed in the history of humanity. People are consuming 3-hour podcasts. They're watching videos on the nichest things you can imagine on YouTube. They're watching TV in a billion different ways that didn't exist before. So yes, you need to adapt to that. So there's a big conversation around which Grace Kite and Tom Roach talked about a lot, which is this idea of, can you build a brand with loads of littles? Because the traditional way of brand building, the thing I grew up on, is big ideas broadcasted through TV and traditional channels and being brutally consistent over time. That's what compounds effects. Now Meta and Google are asking for fresh content every day that has the finger on the pulse and all those things. How do you combine those two? And it's actually not mutually exclusive, because you can use the big old traditional advertising principles in those new environments as well. You just need to make sure that to our point with the long term and short term, you're building on an idea that is long lived, and you're not just jumping on every trend for the sake of it. And then visually and from an audio perspective, you're being distinctive. So you're whatever your content shows up, people will link it back to the brand. Because believe it or not, most content is not linked back to the brand, especially creator content. I think it's like 80%.
And I think the future CMOs and marketing directors that really get that, how that long-term brand building strategic idea is being built over the next couple of years, along with the littles and how it all fits together. They're the ones and the brands that will really kind of cut through.
I think we talked about the ecosystem kind of approach, which is the kind of multiple touch points, and there are more touch points you need to touch on now. There's more assets you need to create. There's more formats you need to translate your creativity into. So ecosystems aren't anything new, but it's now that I think it's the brands that are being nuanced and understanding that. We talked about the Waitrose campaign, where there was obviously like the kind of not TV spot, it was a YouTube spot with Keira Knightley,
like a short film
that then was like there was personalized messaging across the tube, across buses, that linked to that video. And I feel that is the future, is creating that ecosystem around your campaign, which is turning up in different places with creative messaging, whether it's your influencers, whether it's out of home, whether it's a pop-up event. It's creating that thread through for the audience to find you in creative and different ways, which is creating that memory link and building that salience over time.
Which I think you can link back, and we should write a piece of research about this someday, but the short and the long off culture, because you've got your long tail, which for Waitrose is that the posh supermarket that have really good fresh food, right? And then you've got the short tail of it, which is at Christmas when people might be feeling a bit the weight of the world. And then you combine those things and you come up with a campaign that is based on cultural long and short insight. Yeah. And then it's quite natural how you can decline that idea to a billion different platforms. Creators, when I've created good campaigns, creators themselves, without paying them, would be jumping on my campaign. Yeah. Like, for example, for Heineken, we realized that people were spilling shit ton of beer during the big football tournaments. And we created the first insurance for spilled beer, which was an undercover sampling campaign. So every time you spill Stella, we'll replace it with Heineken, and it's free. Amazing. It pays for itself.
So good.
Creators started talking about it.
Yeah.
Naturally, we didn't pay them.
Yeah.
We weren't that clever, had that much time or budget in our hands to find all those people. They just jumped on it because we were relevant in the moment.
Yeah.
We're building on a longer term trend, which is beer connects people together and around sport, and you're building on your brand, right?
Yeah, that is the key. That is the key. And if you do have an idea that does hit home with the customer or cultural scene you're trying to go for, exactly as you say, it will naturally just spread.
Free advertising.
Free advertising, exactly.
Yeah, I think it's something that someone really famous, I can't think of right now who said this, but the main goal of advertising is not to communicate a message through a media, is to get people to do that for you.
Yeah. Well, even another Christmas advert that we've talked about, the John Lewis advert. So the ad where it's obviously the son giving the dad the record.
Everyone is recreating that.
Everyone's recreating it because it tapped into a real human emotion.
Exactly.
It was very direct with the audience. It was obviously dads. If you're a dad that's seen that, you're gonna feel something.
Yes.
So much so that it makes you want to, and even the format, the way it's done, it's quite easy to kind of replicate. So that is, you're completely right. It's creating things that naturally get picked up, talked about, and shared, and how you then empower people to do that through your marketing. Yes. That's the key thing, and that's another thing that brands probably aren't thinking about enough. Is like how do people talk about this? How do people pick this up? How do people share this and making it very easy for them to?
That should be their main goal. Yeah, and that's what, again, from Byron Sharp to Binet and Phil. They call it different ways. Byron Sharp calls it mental availability and reaching everyone in the category. Sounds very scientific. Binet and Phil call it fame. Sounds a bit more comprehensive. You guys and we've been talking about culture. It's all the same thing, really. How do we make people care about something that they're not inherently necessarily caring for and actually actively avoid, which is advertising.
I think that's a good place to end it. Just thank you so much for coming in today, Diego.
Welcome.
I'm sure the audience learned a lot about effectiveness and how you can kind of evolve strategies and hopefully the future of what CMOs and marketing directors look like.
I think we might need a part 2 to dive in more detail.
Maybe we need to find some funding for our research on the long and the short of culture.
Yeah.
That's what we need to do.
Exactly. But yeah, make sure you follow us on Instagram and follow our YouTube to keep up to date with all our future episodes of Pulse. And thank you very much again, Diego.
Cheers, guys, for having me.
Take care.